This is Capital Games Movie Club. I am the Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
Zero. Or should I say hero? Fuck me. Anyway, Zero, in one of the rare instances where you actually choose the movie we're watching, you chose the 2002 Zhang Yimou movie Hero, starring Jet Li, Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung, and Zhang Ziyi, directed by Zhang Yimou. I guess the first thing I want to start with here is, Zero, when did you first watch this movie?
Watched it, I want to say, I think it was a year after it came out theatrically in China. My girlfriend at the time that I was dating, her family had relatives out in Hong Kong, so they would get like movies on VCD, and sometimes they were like clearly a pirated movie. Like it'd be like a cam rip, and it would just be like, ooh, okay, I get it, just it's a VCD, can't complain, but just kind of a bum rap when, and it's a cam rip and it's a VCD. That's just double whammy right there. But thankfully, this particular movie, they ended up actually getting a region-free DVD, if I remember. So it was kind of nice to see it in 1080p and everything.
Nice. I was lucky enough to see it in theaters when it came out in 2004. This was released in China in 2002, and then Quentin Tarantino helped get this to America, and they did a whole blitz advertising that Quentin Tarantino Presents, filmed by Zhang Yimou, and this was being advertised for a few months throughout the summer that year that this was coming out. And I was interested. I was like, oh, this looks really good. But where I lived, which is in a rural town, New Jersey, I did not think it was going to come here because I was very used to films that were of foreign language, unless they are potential Oscar winners and Oscar nominees, that they were not coming to my town. But this did. This came to my local theater. So I was like, oh, I got to go see that. So I went and saw it in the theaters in an empty, and I mean, I'm the only one there in the theater watching this movie, and it was a singular experience. I'll always remember watching that movie, mainly because I was the only one there. We've gotten to that. Let's get into the review of Hero, starring Jet Li, Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung, and Zhang Ziyi, and Donnie Yen as well. Forget about Donnie Yen. Huh. I haven't seen a lot of Donnie Yen films, I think. What are some Donnie Yen films, do you know off the top of your head?
The ones that everyone's probably most familiar with are the Ip Man movies,
Okay.
because he's literally the focal character Ip Man in all four of the movies. I think it was either the third or the fourth one had Mike Tyson show up or whatever.
Oh, well.
So
yeah.
I think that would be probably the one that most people are probably most familiar with Donnie Yen. And then he actually played a character in the latest John Wick movie, if I remember correctly.
Oh, neat. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the review. A lot of memories started flooding back to me from when I first saw this film. This is not my second time watching the film. This is probably like my fourth or fifth, because I do really like this movie, and I do show this off to people when it comes to really good movies that are in a foreign language, but I think are pretty accessible to other people. Don't like foreign language films. But yeah, the memories of watching this movie in the theater really flooded back when I watched this movie today through streaming. The storytelling, I think, is the one thing in this movie that I think surprised me a little bit. Of course, when I watched it the first time, I gravitated towards the cinematography, the colors, the way the film looked, it was shot. And then the second time, the action was a big focal point. But then the storytelling is what grabbed me here, because even though it's not very subtle what they do in this movie, the way that the film tells the story is actually pretty interesting. And I love films like this too, Zero, that the more you watch something, the more you get out of it. Without getting into spoilers, of course, but it tells really multiple stories in a certain sense. Maybe not multiple stories, but it tells a story, and then it tells another story within the subtext, I think, of the plot, I would say, in this. But what's the first thing that jumped out at you when you watched this again?
For me, it was just the cinematography. Just the cinematography is so bold, so colorful, and it's just absolutely stunning, even to this day.
Yes, absolutely. Like the use of fabric, of colors, and we're talking like bold reds and in scenes that are gray but are filled with water and rain and black and white, and it's just beautiful to look at. It's when you get to the first scene of the film where he is I think it's in the king's palace. Is it a king or is it
Yeah, it's the king. It's
Okay.
the king of Qin.
Yeah, like even when you get into that scene, everything pops. It may not even just be the colors, but it's also the set pieces around it. Like when you get into that palace, it's filled with people that are wearing these black robes and these very distinguished steps, and just this huge space that is shown off in this movie. Like it is visually arresting. This movie is, which is what brought me to want to see it in the theaters in the first place, and what brings me back to watch it every time. In the first few times I've seen this film, I would call this film a wildly style over substance film. Maybe at times I would have also called it a just style over style film, because the film is very visually distinctive. It has very acrobatic, very flashy fight scenes. And at the time, I thought that the plot didn't really matter so much. The characters, not really that important. But I think that's the one difference I had watching this film now, is that the characters and the story is actually a lot more interesting than I think I gave it credit for in the past.
As far as the characters, this story's a semi-historical recounting of an event that happened in the early empire days of China and everything. So historically, I'm familiar with the actual historical story that this is based on. So for me, just it was kind of interesting seeing these characters being brought to life and not something that I'd read in a very dry history book.
Now, I got a question for you. Since you are very interested and know a lot about the history of places like China, Japan, is this based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms?
No, this is like,
No.
I think this is during the Warring States period, especially when they mentioned the 7 divided states.
Right, okay. Because a lot of those names in the beginning I was familiar with. And there's, to be honest, the only reason why I'm familiar with them is because of Dynasty Warriors. Because I would look at
Yep.
Wei and Liu. I was like, wait a minute, those are characters, that's from Dynasty Warriors. So that's like
Yeah,
Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Okay.
The Dynasty Warriors games are based on the Warring States period, which is what
Oh.
Romance of the Three Kingdoms is based off of.
Oh, okay.
So very, very turbulent period and everything. But yeah, I want to say that the time period it takes place is when basically, I think it's towards the end of things, where just the king is trying to unify all the empires, even though it is through very, very brute force like methods.
Like I said, it just, when I watched that and I saw those names, I was like, that looks really familiar to me, so I just was curious. We talked about the plot and the direction and the cinematography and how bold and colorful everything is in this. I think we should talk about performances a little bit. And for the most part, the star of the movie is Jet Li, of course, because Jet Li was very popular. Well, not very popular, but he was pretty popular around the time when this was released in the United States. So he was all over the advertising. Jet Li doesn't really do much in terms of acting in this, but he does a lot of the action. But even then, it's like he's really a blank slate for the other characters and actors in this movie, who are much more interesting and much more dynamic in this. So with Jet Li, I guess with the action, he's good. I mean, that's Jet Li, of course. It's Jet Li at his prime. But when it comes to like acting, it's kind of blank. It's kind of like not really.
Jet Li's performance is very dry, it's almost clinical to a sense. It isn't until the midpoint of the movie that's where just you see Nameless's personality sort of come to bear, especially when it gets into the one piece of information that the King of Qin does not have.
I would say that the main performances of the film will probably be with Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung, and Zhang Ziyi in this. Like, all three of them, I think, are really good in this, but I want to especially highlight Tony Leung in this as Broken Sword, I believe. Yes, as Broken Sword.
Yeah.
His character is really interesting in this, and I gotta be honest with you too. It took me a long time to realize that was Tony Leung in the costume that he was in. The way that his beard is and his hair, like I have never seen him like that before. So I was like, wow, this actor is really good, and I don't recognize him. And it was like, I thought Tony Leung was in this. Is he the king? It doesn't look like Tony Leung. I was like, oh my god, that's Tony Leung? Holy shit. But yeah, he's really good in this. Like I really liked his performance in this as a conflicted warrior when it comes to his country and the person that he loves, which is Flying Snow, who is played by Maggie Cheung, who does another really good performance in this as well. Donnie Yen is in this for a little bit, but he starts the plot. But it's carried throughout with these three actors.
And Tony Leung, just wonderful as always. Maggie Cheung, she's got kind of an interesting role in this, especially just in the early part of the story where she makes her appearance. She seems like very cold and very stoic, and then you see her emotions open up as the movie goes further and further in. And then Zhang Ziyi, her character Moon is really interesting because, of course, you start with a depiction of just a student who's almost overly familiar with her teacher, Broken Sword, but as you kind of like go through the movie and everything, just you see that the personality really becomes more of a very, very devoted student and everything. So it was just kind of interesting to see the personalities of both Maggie Cheung and Zhang Ziyi's characters kind of evolve and move as you got further and further into the movie.
And those performances are also twisted with the twists of the movie in the middle. What happens, which we won't get into. We'll get into spoilers with that one. But the fact that those performances remain dynamic and interesting when that twist happens, it is really a testament, I think, to how well written this movie is, but also how great these actors are. I will always remember Zhang Ziyi in her performance in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It was a great performance. And I even liked her in The Grandmaster. Wait, she was in The Grandmaster, right?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. Oh, God. Oh. But yeah, I even liked her in that too, even though I wasn't really a big fan of The Grandmaster. But she's a great actress, and I'd like to see more of her stuff. But she always puts in a great performance in really good movies, so I like her very much in this as well.
I really liked Chen Daoming as the King of Qin, mostly because his pronunciation sort of exudes sort of like a sort of warlord king sort of vibe, especially when in a couple of his speeches with Nameless, he uses the Chinese version of the royal we. And everything. When he makes decrees and stuff like that, it just sounds like how I would imagine just a very, very lordly king who's wanting to vastly expand his empire. Just nailed the depiction that I had in my head from some of the Warring States periods stories that I've read.
Yeah, it was a good performance, I would think. I don't know. I guess because you're familiar with the history and everything along those lines, correct? When it comes to that type of culture, the Chinese culture?
Yeah, the Warring States period stuff in China is a piece of history that almost every Asian kid studies, be it in school or if you're born in the West. Usually you'll have someone in your family just kind of either help read or recite the tales and stuff like that. So yeah, this was something that my family really harped on me learning as a kid. And then when I was dating my ex-girlfriend and everything at the time, her dad was a stone nut for the Warring States period stuff, and I've even gotten the chance to read a written Chinese version of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms stories as well too. So I'm fairly familiar with it.
Nice. Okay, that's cool. I guess the performance for me was fine. I didn't really get much out of that other than like he was a king / dictator, I guess. But I mean, that's interesting. That's really interesting on that one. We're getting spoilers for Hero, the 2002 film by Zhang Yimou. If you haven't seen it, you can come back when you're ready. We'll get into spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I don't know why this aspect of the film whooshed past me the last few times I've seen this film. What really caught me in this is how well the story pivoted when the twist happens. A lot of movies, when they do twists, they either use it as a crutch to save a movie that is not working, or it could also completely destroy a movie. One big example I have that I think a lot of people get pissed off at when I say this is I think the twist of The Usual Suspects makes it a disaster of a film. I hate that film more than anything because the twist just invalidates everything that happens. But in this movie, it's actually brilliantly done. You want to get what the twist of the movie is?
The beginning of the movie is set up by Nameless basically saying, I've slain the 3 most lethal assassins that are threatening the Empire. He regales and recounts the king his tale of just how he assassinated these 3 very threatening assassins that have been plotting to take the king's life for several years now. Of course, just when he gets to the last 2 assassins that he killed, Broken Sword and Flying Snow, the king calls him out on it, and he's just like, your story is a lie. And of course, just Nameless ends up kind of like confused, like, okay, how in the world did you come to this conclusion? And then of course, just this is where the king sort of just kind of goes, here's what I think happened, and just kind of tells his tale on how he thinks the slaying of the last 2 assassins happened. From there, just the king goes, I basically sniffed your story out, and the viciousness of your anger and hatred towards me is clearly indicated by these candles in front of me. And then this is where Nameless kind of pulls a complete twist on the king, because the king's just like, well, I figured it out, and I figured out your plot to assassinate me, so just your whole plan is unraveling before your eyes. And then Nameless kind of ends up sort of changing the game. He's just like, actually, you've underestimated one person. And then this is where the king's just like, okay, interesting. Who? And then that's when Nameless counters with the point of, you've underestimated Broken Sword. And then turns out that Broken Sword had been fixated on just not killing the king due to a failed assassination attempt 3 years prior. And when that happens, it just completely throws out the first half of the movie out the door, and just completely just changes everything.
I want to push back on it throws out the first, because what it does, I think, is it changes the dynamic of the film entirely. For the first act of the film was him regaling those tales of how he assassinated the 3 warriors. And the second act is the king rebutting, saying, no, that's not what happened, this is what I think happened. And then the third act is basically a variation of the truth, I would say, to a certain extent, but still distorted in a way that leaves a little bit to the imagination as to what is true or not. Kind of like Rashomon in a way, where Rashomon is a movie where you don't really get the full picture and the full answer, but you're not meant to in this. Hero is not nearly as deep as Rashomon in this aspect. Don't get me wrong. I think this is a tale of a legend, essentially, where what is the old adage when it comes to legends? If you have the truth of the legend, print the legend. And that the truth might not be as glamorous or as interesting as to what happened, but the legend can inspire others to do great things in this aspect. And I think that's what this movie is a play on. Is that it's what the legend is, what the truth of the legend is, but what is the importance of that legend when that happens. And what it makes me think of in this movie, really, is that there's a reason why the character that Jet Li plays is nameless, because he doesn't really matter in this in the end. Because even though he is believed in the end that he helped facilitate what would unite China, or make that king unite China, in the grand scheme of things, all he did was set the plan in motion. He didn't really change anything. He just made it to a point where it set to the course of what it was bound to do. Whereas Flying Snow wanted to upend the entire thing, but Broken Sword did not, and Nameless just ended up being a vessel for Broken Sword. to a certain extent. Is that kind of what you get to, or do you want to...
Well, Nameless is also nameless because of just his origin story. He's literally an orphan. He has no blood family, no clan that he's associated. He is literally nameless. Not only does he serve as sort of the final cog to set the ideals of Broken Sword in motion, but there's a real literal reason on why he's known as Nameless.
Oh, okay. Is this an actual legend that is about the Warring States?
There is a character during the Warring States period that's literally named Nameless because he has no name, no clan, no family, no blood relatives. He's literally an orphan because he's never had a name. He always just referred to himself as Nameless.
It's hard for me to gauge in this movie specifically what is true and what is false because everything in the movie is so fantastic to a certain extent. Like, it's very clear that these people in real life didn't fly through the air and battle. Like, I know that for a fact. Like,
yeah.
Okay. So there's that. But because of the bombasticness and the color of the movie, I think it's really hard for me to gauge what exactly is true and what is part of the history. And I think, is that done on purpose when it comes to Chinese history? Because a lot of Chinese movies do this when it comes to their history, is that they don't go for the straight thing. They kind of make it more fantastic in a certain extent.
Unfortunately, a lot of Chinese mythology and legends are had a tradition of being passed orally. So kind of like a game of telephone, eventually the details get lost in the breeze. It wouldn't be until like a certain time period that people would start writing down historical accounts of some of these tales, but sometimes the writer would take some creative liberties just with writing down their accounts of the tales and everything. That's just kind of what it is.
I looked at this film. It does kind of tell the same story 3 times to a certain extent, but it does it enough where while telling that same story 3 times, it tells in another story throughout the entire film, which I would say basically is the battle of wordplay, where Nameless is saying his story, the king is saying what he thinks it is, then Nameless goes back, and they go back and forth a little bit, and there is that battle as well that's going on, and that also plays into something that is talked about in the movie as well, where Broken Sword talks about that calligraphy helps make somebody good with the sword, specifically because of the way that the motions and everything that you would have to do to make perfect calligraphy. Calligraphy is part of communication, and so is talk, so that kind of marries those things together to a certain extent. But then again, you might just come back and go, actually, it's about this history thing and that. So go right ahead. Correct me.
Well, the whole calligraphy piece is more of a philosophical message because, of course, in the beginning, just you have Nameless basically mentioning that I asked Broken Sword to write the 19th variation of the word sword because supposedly you can divine the secrets of someone's swordplay by just this character and the handwriting style that a person uses to write this character. Of course, you have basically the scroll being unrolled in front of the king, and the king is just like, I don't get it. All I just see is a written character, and of course later when you get to the later part of the movie where the king basically says, as you know, if you plan to kill me, then just go and fulfill your mission. And he turns his back towards Nameless, but at the same time he starts to look harder at the scroll and basically has kind of a philosophical message about it, and and it turns out that what the king gets out of the character being written on the scroll was, it's not the secret of swordplay, but it's the secret of like the ideal of a person who is trained in the sword, and pretty much just kind of goes into a philosophical thing of just a person almost becomes so good with the sword that any sharp object, even a blade of grass, can become a weapon. But at the same time, the swordsman can later evolve to a much higher state of mental being that violence is no longer necessary. So it's kind of an interesting sort of philosophical take on things, and that was kind of where just he sort of ties it back to Broken Sword, and he's just like, yeah, just now I understand Broken Sword as a person. He wasn't trying to do things by bloodshed. He was trying to do things in kind of a much more larger picture scale sort of ideal. It's kind of interesting that some of the fights are actually considered like sort of philosophical mental battles, that the characters that square off, sometimes they don't physically square off. It's just sort of a duel that they have in the mind while they sort of stare each other down for like several minutes and everything. And kind of an interesting thing, especially since I do have a background in martial arts and everything, that I've had moments in various martial arts schools where just I'll do mental sparring exercises where an instructor will say, okay, so a person attacks you with these following attacks. How would you counter the attacks? It was kind of interesting when I saw it the first time, just seeing this sort of thing sort of play out. All in all, I thought it was sort of interesting having these fights being mentioned as being battles of the mind and not of the body and soul. That was kind of an interesting concept, especially when I saw the movie the first time. And then again, it was interesting seeing it now as an adult and everything. The first mention of this is during the duel between Sky and Nameless and everything. And it's interesting too, because of course, just both of them sort of stop for a second while Nameless pays the Zither player a whole bunch of coins to basically just play music for their duel and everything. You don't see the final strike of the duel happen until like the Zither player's strings, all of them just break, and it's such a dramatic moment.
Yeah, so it's basically planning on what you're doing and then saying it out while the person figures out tactically what he has to do to counteract. That's what it means?
Yeah, it's essentially a thought exercise. Like, there's no physical combat actually taking place. Just, it's more sort of you and the instructor sort of like talking through like, hey, what would be your ideal way to deal with this sort of string of attacks and everything, and then just sort of trying to talk through potential tactics that you would use. And then what always made it interesting was if I wasn't particularly familiar with an attack or a movement, then sometimes I would ask my instructor and say, hey, can you sort of demonstrate how this attack would take place? And then it'd be like, oh yeah, sure. The attack would be coming in from like this angle. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then, I'd kind of go back and think and ruminate a little bit more and go, okay, maybe I can counter this move this way, that way. But yeah, something that I've done a lot in my on and off years of being in martial arts and everything.
I just thought it was like an interesting flourish they put in the movie. These aren't really spoilers, and I don't want to knock the movie for this, but I do want to talk about just this part, not this part, but this thing of the movie that I was thinking throughout the entire film. And it's that if there is a movie that if they could hire a special effects house to redo the special effects of, it would probably be this movie. As visually arresting as the movie is, and when it comes to set design and colors and everything, the special effects in this really look dated. You mentioned the sky fight, the water drops as as Nameless goes and attacks Sky in that scene. The water is very clearly CGI. I mean,
yeah.
Really clearly CGI. And then in that other scene, in the next scene as well, when the arrows are hitting the calligraphy palace, the arrows that they have that with that scene of the arrow going in, I remember look really cool in the theaters, but watching it now, it's like, ooh, that does not look good. Like, that looks pretty chintzy. Like, it's not like The Mummy Returns Rock Bad. The Rock Bad. I don't know if you've seen that scene where the Rock is in the Mummy Returns. It's really bad, but it's not that bad. But it's distracting enough to where if this is your first time seeing the movie, it's gonna really stand out. So I would say for the people who own this, unfortunately, I think it's still Miramax who has the rights to this movie. If you were going to do like a 25th anniversary in a few years of this movie, I would hire somebody to remaster the movie and update those special effects to make them look a lot better than they are. That's really the only other thing I want to.
The special effects, unfortunately, have not aged very well.
No, but at the time when this was released, these were cutting edge. Like, these were really nice looking special effects. And this is around the time where wire fu was what they called this. I think there's another name for it, I believe, in China. It was popularized because of The Matrix in America, at least. And then when The Matrix made it big, that's what got Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon to get made, because Ang Lee was able to make that movie and make it for the States as well. They have a specific name. Do you know what that name is for this type of martial arts movie?
I know it as a genre of martial arts novel.
Wuxia?
Wuxia,
Okay.
yeah, which is essentially high martial arts fantasy is literally what it boils down to.
Okay. Like, I'm not talking about that. Like, I think that's cool. I like that style. It serves its purpose in this movie as well, but I'm just talking about, like, the special effects. Like, that needs work in this movie, and again, I'm not going to knock points off of it because of that, because I even said, like, this is a movie from 2002. Special effects from that time, like, if you look at, like, Spider-Man from that time, and Spider-Man 2, the special effects do not look good in that movie. I still think the film is really good the way it is. You just gotta look past those special effects.
This is probably going to be right around an 80 for me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a great movie. The cinematography is excellent. And then if you're kind of into Ang Lee style of martial arts choreography with like the wire fu sort of stuff, then, I mean, just it's an absolute treat of a movie to watch. But again, just the only downsides just seem to be that this movie has not aged well, special effects wise, because much like you, just especially when you see stuff like the arrows zooming through the air to the calligraphy studio, and like I think one of the particular scenes that's particularly bad is just where you've got like almost kind of like a GoPro follow cam effect going on. It was just like, oh, that just looks bad.
Yeah. Like, that scene specifically, like, I mentioned the water droplets thing. I think that's the one scene that really needs it. That specific scene with the arrow is just like, it's like, that could be done a lot better. I don't know what a special effects house can do to make that look better. To be fair, that might just be the way it was shot, and they got no other thing they can do with that. But yeah, that's definitely something. So 80% is what you're giving it?
Yeah.
I originally, when I saw this in theaters and when I saw it multiple times, I've consistently given it a 4-star. I'm going to give it 4.5 this time. A lot of the aspects of this film are really well done. I really like the fight choreography, the colors and everything in the movie, the way it's shot. Like, those things keep standing out. And what made me not go higher in the past, because I didn't think this was that deep of a movie. And I prefer my films to be deep, philosophical, and filled with character development and everything. I don't know why it took me to this viewing to finally realize that, oh wow, there's actually a lot here that I just did not realize. That it made it a lot more interesting to watch this time and get a much deeper appreciation of this movie. So I'm giving it 4.5 stars. I think this is a really good movie. It might be the best of these types of movies, I think. It might even be a little bit better than Crouching Tiger. Mainly because, and I'm going to say it for this reason, mainly because Hero does one thing really well that a lot of these types of films, like just action films entirely, that I would call them elevated action films, that they tend to do wrong, is that they overstay their welcome. Hero is a 90-minute movie, like maybe 95 minutes. It knows what it has to do, it executes it really well, and it gets out. Whereas other films like this type may go for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, good lord, 3 hours at times, and it doesn't need to. Hero recognizes that, and it doesn't do that. So it's a brisk 90-minute movie, and it works out really well in that case. So 4.5 stars for me. If they do a special edition, please update the special effects. But other than that, excellent movie. Really like this. Really appreciate this now for the 4th time. Really good movie. Okay, Zero, so you chose the movie last week. I'm going to choose this movie this week. and we're going to watch a movie that I think we both have a fondness for, and that is Hayao Miyazaki. And if you guys don't know who Hayao Miyazaki is, you might be more familiar with the studio that... does he run it, or is he just a filmmaker for it? I'm not entirely sure.
I believe it is his studio.
Oh, it's just his studio. Okay. And his studio is Studio Ghibli, of such movies as Ponyo, Spirit Away, My Neighbor Totoro, definitive classics in animation. Essentially, like, if you've seen a Studio Ghibli film, you've seen some of the best animation you could ever see in a film. And I've been wanting to watch this film for a while, and I thought, I had another movie in mind, but then when you mentioned you had all these movies as well, I was like, you know what? Let's get more into Hayao Miyazaki a little bit. So we're going to watch Howl's Moving Castle. This was done in 2004? I thought this was in the 90s.
No.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Howl's Moving Castle was after Spirited Away?
Yeah.
That's weird. Okay. I thought The Wind Rises was the one after. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, shows what the fuck I know. Good lord. Okay. So, next week, me and Zero are going to review Howl's Moving Castle, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. I'm going to sense that you've seen this movie, correct?
I have not.
Oh, nice!
Mostly because just Studio Ghibli films, I have to be in sort of the right headspace for it.
Really?
And for the longest time when that had come out, I was just not in the right mind space. I was just like, yeah, I want to see it, but not right now. And then, of course, well, what happens? Procrastination takes over.
Well, okay. I mean, I understand with a movie like Spirited Away, which is a little more serious, that you would have to be in the mood for. What about Miyazaki's films that you have to be in a certain mindset for? Or does whimsy just piss you off? Sorry.
I mean, it's not that. I think just at the time when Howl's Moving Castle had come out, just I'd gone through a really bad breakup and everything. I was just like, I'm just not in the right space for this. I know everyone's just like, oh yeah, you gotta watch this, and I'm just like, I know, but just not right now. And then just as procrastination took hold, it was just something I was like, well, guess I'm not seeing this movie anytime soon.
Yeah. Okay, well, I haven't seen the film either, so I'm going to look forward to watching this. And Billy Crystal is the voice in it. Come on now. Yeah? Yeah? I know you're excited. All right, so for next week, me and Zero are going to watch Howl's Moving Castle, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. And until then, this is Capital Games Movie Club. I am The Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.